So Ravens flock, we're about more or less a week removed from the draft happening, and the Ravens had a very interesting draft, a very eventful draft. They picked 11 people just like everybody predicted they would. Unfortunately, they made a lot of picks. Will these picks actually work out? Only time will tell, but history tells us they most of them won't. But that's neither here nor there. At the end of the day, many Ravens fans are excited about this draft class, but I always want to remind people that this is what every NFL fan base does. Like, you see this every single year where every NFL fan base thinks that they have the greatest draft of all time. Only like a handful of fan bases are mad at their draft class. Everybody else, they think they got the biggest steal in this round and that round and so on and so forth. But with thinking about that, I started to go down like a rabbit hole where I just started basically just analyzing every team in the NFL's draft, their entire draft class. And then I specifically started to just zone in on the teams in the AFC North, mainly because I just wanted to know, like, well, what are our rivals doing? Are our main rivals, are they getting better? Or are they just kind of going to be stuck in the same place that they were already in? So with that, I started to go over their draft classes to see, like, is there anyone that's really impressive that really could allow them to potentially become bigger threats or potentially leapfrog teams that they may have been behind in the AFC North. And I wanted to just make a quick video talking about that. First, I wanted to touch on the Steelers draft class since they finished second in the AFC North last year. They were a competitive team like they always are, but you know that they're gonna finish 9-8 either way. It really don't matter. But as far as their draft class, they got Derek Harmon, the defensive tackle, Caleb Johnson, the running back, Jack Sawyer, linebacker, I think that's pronounced Yaya Black, who's a D end in round 5. Then they got Will Howard, the quarterback, in round 6, Carson Bruner, the linebacker, in round 7, and then Dante Kent, a cornerback, in round 7. Now, I thought their draft class was honestly pretty mid. I don't know what they're going for exactly. I just can't see what the direction or the goal is here, other than I guess maybe help stack up the trenches a bit, specifically with a guy like Derek Harmon. He's my favorite pick out of that class that they have. He's somebody who, even though I wanted a guard in the first round or a tackle, if we had gotten a guy like Derek Harmon, I would have been pretty satisfied with that. I actually really liked him. He was one of my favorite prospects in this draft class, so I'm pretty biased with that pick. But I mean, the rest of this class, I don't think this will really move the needle for the Steelers. I don't think this is gonna really make much of a difference for them. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but I doubt it. I think this is gonna be a class that kind of comes and goes, especially because what are the Steelers really gunning for this year anyway? Not really much of anything at this point. They're just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, hoping that they could sign a 40-something-year-old quarterback who is past his prime, coming off of a Achilles tear, and is not going to change their destiny of being 9-8 and getting bounced in the wild card round. But then the third place team in the AFC North was obviously the Cincinnati Bengals. This is another draft class that I didn't think was really that impressive. Like, they got Shamar Stewart in the first round, the edge out of Texas A&M, the linebacker Demetrius Knight out of South Carolina, a guard Dylan Fairchild out of Georgia. They also picked up Barrett Carter, who's a linebacker out of Clemson, Jalen Rivers, who's a tackle out of Miami, and then Taj Brooks, the running back out of Texas Tech. Again, this is a draft class I didn't think was all that impressive, mainly because I could be wrong about Shamar Stewart. I'm just not a big fan. Maybe it's because I'm a Ravens fan, so we already kind of got a little burnt from drafting a guy really early who didn't have a whole lot of production in college, Odafe Owe. So when I see someone like Shamar Stewart, who people were excited about, but nobody really had any real answer for if he'll be able to be more productive in the NFL than he was in college, because he wasn't productive in college as far as producing sacks. But hey, who knows? Maybe he becomes a star, but I doubt it. Demetrius Knight, I'm assuming they got this guy. Now, I think he was a decent prospect. I'm assuming they got him hoping he could be somebody who could stop Lamar Jackson, as I would think all teams in the AFC North as well as the AFC would want out of their linebackers. But uh, there's nothing in this Bengals class that I think really stands out. But on the flip side, the Cleveland Browns, and this is something that was really kind of making me take a step back and almost be kind of mind blown, because I tried to be as objective as possible when I'm just looking at all these teams in their draft class and the upside and the players they got. And by far, I think the Browns may have had the most interesting and the most impressive draft out of these other guys in the AFC North by far. Obviously they got Mason. Well, first they traded the second pick with Jacksonville to get their 2026 first round pick, and in exchange they moved back to 5. At 5 they got Mason Graham. Then in the second round they got linebacker Carson Schwarzenegger out of UCLA. Third round they got Quinshawn Jenkins, one of the 2 running backs out of Ohio State. Oh no, that was in the second round, not the third round. But then in the third round they picked up tight end Harold Fannin Jr. In the third round again, they picked up Dylan Gabriel, the quarterback. Then in the fourth round, they picked up running back Dylan Simpson out of Tennessee. And then, of course, obviously in the fifth round, they picked up Shador, the quarterback out of Colorado. And yeah, again, to me, this is just a fascinating draft class here, because I could see what they're going for. There's several key players they want to replace, such as a guy like, I'm not saying they're trying to replace David Njoku, but David Njoku's in his prime right now, and I think their goal is to bring in somebody like Harold Fannin to be his replacement in maybe 3 to 4 years. And then also they're clearly trying to replace Nick Chubb. They brought in Quinshawn Jenkins, hoping that could fix that problem. They drafted this linebacker who I'm assuming they hope could take what's that linebacker's name? JOK? I forgot his name. There's one linebacker on the Browns who recently had a neck injury that reportedly might be so serious to the point where he may not be able to play football again, because if he takes the wrong hit, he may just become paralyzed. Like, he may become a vegetable. So I would imagine their goal is like, hey, we have to just assume he's never coming back. So real quick, I was trying to be as unbiased as possible, because being biased and thinking that all of your rivals suck and none of them are good, like that's not realistic, and underestimating people is the easiest way to get killed. So as far as the players that I think were the most talented out of those other teams and have the most upside, I would put Mason Graham on top. I think that's obvious. He's a top 5 pick for a reason. He's a guy who could just be a devastating force on the interior defensive line, just stopping the run nonstop. That makes me very nervous, especially when it comes to our guards. Can we handle this guy? I really don't know. And the main reason I think someone like him could be so devastating of a pick is because if he lives up to his potential, you're talking about a guy like this being teammates with Myles Garrett, who, again, Myles Garrett, I don't think is debatable. I think he is the best pass rusher in football, the best defensive player overall in football. To have a guy like Mason Graham in the middle of that defensive line, going at guys like Falele and I'm assuming Voorhees, that could create a lot of problems for us. So I would find that to be pretty concerning. Then the second player that I thought was the most talented out of our rivals' draft classes was Shador Sanders. Regardless of how you feel about Shador, I know he's become kind of polarizing, because some people think he deserved to fall. Some people don't. Some people think that regardless of where you fall in that conversation, Shador was still the second best, or arguably the best quarterback in this draft class. Even if you don't think it's the best draft for quarterbacks, he was still a guy who had first to second round talent. Him falling all the way to the 5th round was just sad, but also insane. And he's a guy with, I don't think he has the highest ceiling, but a high enough ceiling to where he should be considered a threat. I know people are saying that he's not going to get on the field because he's so far down the depth chart, but we got to look at this realistically. Deshaun Watson is cooked. He's had like a bunch of injuries. He played terrible even when he was in the game. They're ready to move on from him. Joe Flacco's like 80. Kenny Pickett's a glorified backup. It's really just going to come down to Shedeur and Dylan Gabriel just duking it out during the season and preseason and training camp, and seeing which one of them kind of gets into that QB3 spot and probably get a starting spot, because I don't think Joe Flacco's going to finish the year. Like, when was the last time Joe Flacco started and finished the year on a football team? Like, it's been a while. Joe Flacco even had to take a back seat to Anthony Richardson, of all people, on the Colts. Like, so you can't just assume that one of these guys, these quarterbacks that they drafted, are gonna just never get a chance to start. It's clear that the Browns want to experiment this upcoming season. So if they are experimenting, I think Shedeur could be a threat, because I think out of that room, he has the most upside. He's easily their most accurate player. People have compared him to Tua, but honestly, I think he's better than Tua. So we'll see how that goes. After that, I listed Demetrius Knight as another person who could be a threat. I'm not even that big of a fan of him. I only really listed him, to be honest, just because I felt like I had to list somebody from the Bengals. And then also I had Derek Harmon, I had Derek Harmon above Demetrius Knight. Derek Harmon was one of my favorite draft prospects. He's somebody who, if the Ravens had gotten in the 1st round, I wouldn't have been that mad at, because I think he can be a force. Another guy who, similar to Mason Graham, can cause a lot of problems for opposing teams' running attack. And I'm definitely concerned about if our guards can handle this guy. Then from there, next person I had listed was Harold Fannin Jr. I'm assuming the Browns are going to have a lot of 2 tight end sets this upcoming season. David Njoku's already a top 10 tight end. This guy, if he lives up to what he was at Bowling Green, he could be a very underrated number 2 tight end. Like, at Bowling Green, this guy was balling. When his quarterback targeted him at Bowling Green, his quarterback's passer rating was a 126.3. Like, this dude was insane. And I don't care if people say that he played bad competition or lesser competition. Even when he played some of the better teams in college football, like Penn State, he still balled out. So hey, I think he could be a very interesting player. But by far, like I said, I think the Browns may have made the biggest leap in the offseason out of any team in the AFC North. Well, out of all of our rivals in the AFC North, I think the Browns may have made the biggest leap in this offseason when it comes to how they handle the draft. And if all things actually worked out, like, when I'm looking at these teams, I'm trying to think, okay, what's the best case scenario for each of these teams and the draft class that they had? And when I look at Cleveland, like when I look at Pittsburgh's upside and when it comes to their draft class, I can't see much happening beyond them just having an even more stacked defensive line, which they already got a stacked defensive line. It's still not stopping them from their destiny of being 9-8. So I don't know what kind of upside that is really. Even as far as the Bengals upside, I mean, maybe Dylan Fairchild is a guy capable of winning a starting job at the guard position to improve the Bengals offensive line, because they've had struggles there Joe Burrow's entire career. Maybe Shamar Stewart can be a really good edge rusher. Hopefully he can, because Trey Hendrickson's their only real threat on that defensive line, and they need somebody who could actually make a difference. Not guy, they don't need another guy like Sam Hubbard or whatever. Like, they need a real difference maker opposite of Trey Hendrickson. Maybe Shamar can be that. I imagine he'll get a lot of one-on-ones because everybody's going to be so focused on stopping Trey. But maybe again, even with that draft class, I don't see a whole lot of upside. Maybe Taj Brooks ends up being better than, I forgot the name of their starting running back, but better than him. Like I don't. But even then, what difference is he gonna make? Like the Bengals in general don't like running the ball. Like I don't. Again, you see, my mind is spinning. I can't imagine how much upside there is to that draft class. But when it comes to the Browns draft class, like this is legitimately a fascinating draft class to me. Like if all things went well for them, I'm not saying they will. I can't predict the future, but if all things went well for the Browns draft class, you're talking about them potentially having the next great defensive tackle who lives up to his potential and gets put into the same conversations with guys like Chris Jones or Dexter Lawrence or Jalen Carter or whoever, Then also in that same draft class, potentially finding a replacement for Nick Chubb and Quinshon Jenkins, having a tight end who could develop and eventually take David Njoku's spot in like 3 years, and then potentially having their franchise quarterback, whether it's Shador or Dylan Gabriel, but then they still got the Jaguars' first-round pick next year, and I don't think the Jaguars are going to be well at all this year. I think the Jaguars are going to be just as bad as they were last year. So you're talking about potentially finding your franchise quarterback, an elite defensive tackle, and your new bell cow running back in one draft, while also finding a few depth pieces. And on top of that, potentially having a top 5 pick next year anyway from Jacksonville. Like, to me, I think that would be, like, to me, that's, the Browns are easily a team that out of the AFC North, their draft class could have the most upside. They're a major wild card, and I think they could very well put, I think they very well could leapfrog Cincinnati as well as Pittsburgh when it comes to the AFC North. They're definitely going to leapfrog Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh, they're destined for 9-8 or 8-9 or 8-1. They're destined for that no matter what, as far as I'm concerned. But you never know, man. If, like, at the very least, they could leapfrog a lot of teams, even outside of the AFC North. They could just leapfrog a couple of teams and slip into the wild card spot. You never know. But let me know what you think about this. Do you think that any of these teams in the AFC North had a draft class that was impressive enough for you to consider them a bigger threat, or do you think that all of their draft classes were underwhelming and they're going to continue to be bottom of the barrel teams?